Welcome to Directionally Correct, a paperless podcast with Cole and Scott. Today's guest, James Gallman, VP of HR Systems and Analytics at NetApp.
Thanks to our sponsors, OneModel. OneModel helps people leaders at large organizations make consistently brilliant talent decisions by unlocking the analytical value of the data dispersed across your business. OneModel's people analytics platform takes all of the heavy lifting out of data extraction, cleansing, modeling, analytics, and reporting of enterprise workforce data. OneModel pioneered people data orchestration and has perfected the ethical use of AI and data science for leaders who need transparent and explainable decision support systems. HR and business teams trust its accurate reports, analyses, and storytelling capabilities. Data scientists, engineers, and people analytics professionals love the combination of governance and flexibility that no other workforce insights platform can provide. To learn more, book a demo at onemodel.co/directionallycorrect. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
I never rode the bus, and I always wanted to. I was jealous because those kids left class 10 minutes early at the end of the day.
Oh, did they?
Well, they did at our school anyway.
See, that was I had the exact opposite experience. I was always jealous of the kids who got their parents to come pick them up because the buses always went out later, so it wasn't an early thing. And I mean, my house was really far, so I was always my whole life. My house was either the last stop or the second to last stop, and so I'm riding this bus for an hour.
You're on the bus forever.
Yeah, I was on the bus forever. So every morning, every evening. Well, we only did the morning. When we were young, my parents would take us to school but not pick us up, and then we got to a certain age, and then we had to ride the bus to school and home. Man, I mean, I probably wasted so many hours of my life. I will tell you this. Riding the school bus teaches you about life. So you want to find out that Santa Claus isn't real? Ride the bus. You want to find out what curse words are and what sex is before you're supposed to? Ride the bus, because that's what I did.
Did you form alliances on the bus? Little social, is there cool kids seating where they're definitely in the back, right? or do you have your partner that you sit with every day?
There was definitely a hierarchy to where you got to sit on the bus by your grade and by how cool you were. And I definitely was at the low end of that hierarchy for most of my life. But James, did you ride the school bus to school when you were a kid?
Some, but I also walked.
Okay.
Smart man.
Yeah. School wasn't that far away, so I could easily walk.
Now, James, did you walk 15 miles uphill both ways in the snow to school? Is that how far you walked?
Only my father did, according to his telling of the story. Yeah, and of course we grew up in South Carolina, so there was 6 feet of snow because it was South Carolina, and my father actually only lived about 3 houses away from school. It's actually a funny story about him. I really admire him a lot, and we're really close. His brother was 1 year older than him, and when his brother started to go to grade school, my dad was just like, "Look, I'm not staying in this house by myself. I have to go," and so he just sneaked out of the house and started going to school with his brother.
Well, I guess we'll just accept him.
And this is the late 1940s, right? So the rules of rigidity of you may not, it just didn't hold up. So,
well, back then you could just show up and go to war too. It's they're 15. I mean, put a rifle in their hands, whatever.
Yeah, and but that was probably the beginning of him kind of always getting his way. And so now he has had a lifetime of all of us training him about that. My stepmother recently called me up. She said, I can't take it when you come anymore. Your father is unbearable after you leave, because I do everything he says. I realized a while ago, I'm going to give in. So why fight and then still give in? So I was just okay, what do you want? You want me to go do that for you? Okay, I'll go do it. But then he thinks he can boss everybody else around.
Oh my gosh. It's amazing, we take on the roles we're assigned as kids. As adults, we get around those same situations. You just naturally fall into the same patterns over and over. I noticed this with my parents when my sister comes to visit at the same times. Like we just kind of adopt, like these sort of caricatures of ourselves. Essentially, she doesn't act like that when I'm alone with her at other times.
Yeah. You fall into the grooves of
Yeah.
what the family dynamics are, what the friend dynamics are, whatever it may be. I have to ask James though, you have your title as exceptional alien. And I know are you peacocking us here? Like what are you trying to like provoke us? What's going on there?
So, a number of years ago, I took a job in Switzerland. And when I was there, the transliteration of the title on my, I think it's called Ausländer Ausweis. It's a foreign sort of permit, the work permit, kind of like the H-1B,
Sure.
is if you transliterate it, it's exceptional alien. And I said, oh, I love that. That would be the title. If I were to write an autobiography of my
Oh,
life,
absolutely.
that would be my title. I mean, I've lived in Switzerland, I lived in China for a while. I happen to be here in Philadelphia right now visiting my mom, so I've lived here for a while. But I think even more so, I basically am trained as a chemical engineer who's really good at building mathematical models. And I've been able to be a chemical engineer, a logistics professional, and supply chain kind of guy, work in IT, now get to work in HR and people analytics and HR tech. And so I've visited all these really wonderful lands as sort of like this outside observer that's helping to kind of try to figure out how to put order into chaos. So I think Exceptional Alien kind of fits.
What part of Switzerland were you based out of?
Zurich.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. River running through the town, beautiful turquoise water.
Yeah, you can go get in the lake in the summer and it's really beautiful and just kind of go and swim in the lake. And it's just so strange because, it's just right there. It's like if here
Yeah.
in Philadelphia, if you could just go out and get into the Delaware or go out and get into the Schuylkill River, which you can't do. It's just right there in front of you and you can go do it.
I suppose you could be like pushed into the Delaware River, right? Like
Yeah.
sort of a different
You,
experience.
you wouldn't want to. You wouldn't want that to
Yeah.
happen. It's actually a really deep and really fast flowing river. That would not be a good thing.
Well, James, as an exceptional alien that you are, I think you came up through kind of the people analytics space, but you have a much broader remit nowadays. And specifically, you mentioned, HR technology. What role or how do you think about what role analytics plays versus technology versus maybe the other aspects of your role, and how has your thinking progressed in that space throughout your career?
Wow. Okay. We actually were having this conversation earlier in the week. So, the scope of my job is I have HR operations, HR technology. I actually have the PMO also for HR, along with the people analytics team. And very early on, I started to understand data quality issues were driven a lot by, of course, what was the config and optionality that we put into our HR technology. So you can't get great data about leaving reasons if you don't configure your system to actually give you that data about leaving reasons. Now, there's other stuff that we can talk about leaving reasons if you want to a little bit more later. And that's just one example. And a lot of HR transactions are self service, of course, but many others are entered by an HR professional and validated by the HR operations team and some other stuff. So, just having that full life cycle of being able to design the business process in combination with employees, managers, COEs, and then being able to build that out and then being able to analyze it and operationalize it, it's really the intersection of all three of those that leads to great insights. But I'll tell you, what has me the most excited right now is that we're building a sort of virtual agent that is a thing that I've kind of had in my head for a long time. We're going to start doing nudging, where we're going to
Hmm.
and operationalize goodness to leaders and to ultimately even to employees, we believe. Some goodness that we're thinking about. We know a lot about how people feel about the company, when you're excited about your work. We also know from just other research, like what's good for people. In the flow of work, embedded in Microsoft Teams, you're going to have a little bit of an agent that's going to push to people, hey, you haven't updated your goals in the last quarter. Let's go ahead and take a look at goals and where you might want to change or update. And is there anything about your performance that you want to document or highlight that's going to tell your leader and keep for yourself? And just
Mhm.
think about how we could do that in a personalized way for, well, we have 12,000 people, for 12,000 folks, and have it really work to support people and doing the best work that they can do and having the best employee and manager experience that they can have. So this thing, we're doing some testing right now. A lot of it at the very beginning is going to be about performance management. It's going to be about engagement. But that's kind of where we're headed at the very beginning around this thing. And it's super fun. And we're very excited about where it's headed.
Absolutely. I mean, like the idea of having a personal sidekick that can actually do things for you. I think that a lot of like the LLMs, it hasn't come to fruition yet, right? It's been a lot of chat bots and this sort of stuff. Even if it's even realized at all in a lot of ways that we can see, it hasn't quite done things for us. But if you can, like think about the employees, the crap that they got to do every year. Like you got to populate your goals. Like everyone kind of like, oh God, really? Or like you got to pick your 360 providers. Like, damn it, damn it! It's like another thing that you got to do on top of the actual work that you're expected to do. And I think this is really the future. And it of course, it's going to span the whole realm of HR things from onboarding all the way through promotions, all the way through leaving the organization. But I love this idea of having a personal sidekick that we can kind of rely on. It'll do the sort of crap that you don't want to do. That was always the dream of LLMs.
Right, right.
And have we reached the ceiling of things that we can gain insights from pushing insights to people or giving nudges to people, or whether it be managers or individual employees? Like where should we be going in that space, and what value is untapped?
Um, well, I think the untapped value is so much of what we do in the analytics space is not democratized for insight for people. For, we talk about people analytics, but how much of it is really democratized for people and for people to really understand what's good for them? We don't share the things that are drivers of attrition, engagement, like that. We share it with managers, with senior
Yeah,
leaders.
yeah,
We
yeah,
really share it with employees? No.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and even if we didn't decide, hey, you know what, maybe that's just a little bit beyond the pale of where we want to go, do we not have the obligation to try to tell you what would make your experience better by democratizing at least that for you? Hey, if you start to get more personal development, it's going to help with your growth, and therefore you're going to have more opportunities either here or elsewhere. And we noticed that maybe this employee A is somewhat at the lower end of that. They're at the low end of engagement.
Yeah.
They're at the low end of participation. They don't have very many one-on-ones with their leader. They don't have a lot of personal learning and development. They don't have goals recorded in our systems. All those things that we could do to tell people, hey, this is how you can have a great employee experience here. I think we have an obligation to try to make that real for people.
Absolutely. This is what the IO psychologists are supposed to be doing, making people's lives better while making the company more efficient. And like you're so right. Like we feed these insights back to HRBPs or senior leaders, be like, well, if people start engaging in this sort of like X behavior, then they're more likely to leave. But it doesn't filter back down to that individual, which is like where you're talking about the agents is going to be super critical. It's like, hey, people that stay in this sort of role for more than 2 years, like you, have a
Yep.
bad outcome. They're going to get burned out and they're going to do their stuff. Maybe these are some other opportunities that fit your sort of skill set and you can fit in, you make a valuable contribution to the organization, and be happy here, get promoted. I don't know, do whatever the hell you want to do with your career.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm just spitballing here. I don't
yeah.
know.
And I think that's exactly what we want to do. And there's and Cole, you mentioned like the upper limit, and I'm like, wow, I'm not sure where that is, because the
Well,
amount of good research that we see and read and we hear about every month, I'm more worried about the limit of how many nudges we can push in a week or in a day to someone.
mm,
Because we were starting
yeah,
to play around with this idea, and we're like, okay, so we really wouldn't want to push more than maybe two a week. And we're probably going to start out with just one a week to people to get them thinking and doing. Because what we don't want to have happen is we want it to be high signal, low noise, right? So we need it to be very specific, very relevant. Got to be directly to Scotty or to Cole. It can't
mhm,
be something that's generic for any employee. That's like part one of it. And then it's got to be short enough and actionable so that people can see it, read it, and want to do it, as opposed to it being a little bit too theoretical where they have to go read a 22-page research paper, think about it, and then try to contextualize it in the flow of work. And that's perhaps the last thing about it. And I said it at the very beginning. Um, this notion that we're going to put it and make it real, we're thinking that right now, the place we want to put it is in uh,
mhm,
a virtual agent that sits within Microsoft Teams. We're a pretty heavy Teams user as a company. And therefore, it's in the flow of work. You're not going to the
yeah,
HR portal to go find it. You're not going to a special web page. You're not going to any of our big box technologies. It's just right there with you, just as you're getting other messages. And we also want to try to get out of email, because there's just so much
yeah.
email spam and noise that we feel like that would be another, it would get messy. So we're trying it out, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, the worst thing that could happen is that your nudges. I mean, the reason why people don't like email is because all of this spam and clutter and the things that are coming in that are low value add. The fear is you don't want your nudges to become the new form of spam, right? And so they, again,
Right.
to your signal to noise ratio has to be really on point. But I think there's a deeper question here that we touched on a little bit, which is sort of, is people analytics for the people, or maybe even reframed, is should people analytics be for the people, or are we getting paid for people analytics to just be for HR leaders and business leaders?
Hmm. Well, okay, I'm going to give you an answer, and then I'm going to give you an analogous answer just about something else. I think that it should be the right things for a balance of people. There is a people analytics that we need to serve the organization and senior leaders and HR. But the best organizations have engaged, happy, dedicated, supported people. And if our people analytics is not doing that part, that's not helping them directly, I think we're missing the boat a little bit. Just, we can act as capacity builders for our organizations for better manager interactions. A good friend of mine, Alan Kamen, and I worked together when we were at GE. And one of the things that we said to each other one day was, what if we could make, you know, and I think at the time we had like 30 or 40,000 managers at GE. What if we could make every one of them just 5% better? What would the multiplier effect of that be for doing something like that? And it's just astronomical when you think about it, and think about all the thousands of lives and employees and families that are better off. And so it's kind of that same thing. And my analogy to this is, yesterday I was spending some time with a new colleague who comes to us from the military. And one of the things that he was talking about was, hey, I would love to, and we're just getting to know each other. I would love to be able to, help people with that transition to work. It's a personal passion and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but it's also good for the company, because every time that we find great new talent who can do this work, do it well, come in and be successful, we're a better organization. So I don't want to diminish his need for that personal fulfillment,
mhm,
but at the same time, again, building capacity, thinking about it for the people, for the organization, and how we work together. I think that's just really important.
Everyone kind of has once again a role to play here, right? Like you can give all the information to an individual worker, but they can't do everything about the structure of the teams or like how
Right.
the organizational culture like that. It needs to go to different levels and like finding that right balance and the right mixture is kind of the magic, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, and if you think about the activation of the employee survey, we'll go to something that's a little bit closer back to home again.
Yeah.
Um, I've always struggled with the fact that we have to cascade the results to the senior most leaders. And I would be honest with you, last time I more had direct leadership of the survey, I'm like, okay, so senior leaders are going to see it on Friday and managers are going to see it on Monday morning. So it's like I'm short circuiting the whole cycle here because we were asking managers to think, especially that frontline manager, to think about their direct team. We're asking senior leaders to think about how they were empowering their management cohort to have things that happen at the direct team. Because you get to these jobs where you're like a SVP, there's no action that you're going to take that's going to really transform things. I mean, maybe there are a few, right? But a lot of it is very local. Engagement, like politics, is local. And so you got to think about it at the very most local level. And I think the same thing is going to be true where we're now taking it all the way down to the individual and thinking about this agent a little bit more.
Yeah. When you mentioned Alan Kamen a minute ago. He's a friend of the podcast, and we'll get him on here eventually. And you mentioned there's what if managers could get 5% better? And earlier you were also saying about autonomous AI agents. Isn't that really the future of all of these LLMs and the impact of generative AI is to help us scale things but keep it local? Right.
Right.
And so if the politics is local, if the insights are local, if the change is local, and these LLMs have the ability to take all that wisdom and knowledge that's collectively organized, but couldn't we give those insights locally and then push them out there? I don't know. Can you talk to us about, what you're thinking about in the agent space or in the AI space, and then what issues do you also foresee in that space?
Well, like I said, we're experimenting with an agent that's going to do some things for us. And I think it's going to be interesting to just kind of like push some things, but it's still a very complex ecosystem and world right now, right? Because you've got your HCM, which probably has your goals and your performance information. You probably also have a talent intelligence platform, which may or may not be in your goals environment. You've got your ticketing system, which sits in another technology. You may also have a learning platform that may or may not be the same. And so the challenge is how do you, and every one of those vendors that we can all think and name are all building their own agents.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the challenges are multifold. One of the
And you're saying
challenges,
all those agents are going to fail. I agree.
no, no, no. I don't know that they're going to fail. Well, you know what? I am a little bit worried. I do think they're going to fail. And here's why.
Yeah,
Um,
they are.
because every one of them is its own little island. It's its own little beautiful walled garden. But I, as an employee, live in a space where I need to navigate between too many of them. I think one of the solutions that we could start to drive towards is as we understand how agents call other agents and get smarter about that and understand, oh, if James is starting to think about learning, let me go tap into whatever learning platform that his company happens to have, and let me go start to ask that agent to help me answer this question. So my personal agent is going to have a bit of an understanding of the technology ecosystem that my company has, and it's going to reach into it and say, hey, let me figure out where to go. So I think we're going to start to see a little bit more of that. Agents calling other agents to give answers, just as well. When we have a problem, we often phone a friend. It's going to be the analogy of that, of phoning a friend to be able to make that work.
I mean, we'll get into like how these like LLMs are developed later on in the nerdery, but Hey man, I'm going to Savannah, not Savannah, Georgia. Where am I going? Charleston, South Carolina next
Mhm.
week. Give me some recommendations.
Stay at the Dewberry. It's my favorite.
Dewberry.
Yeah, it's my favorite hotel, and the rooftop bar is quite excellent while you're there. Rodney Scott um, has a great barbecue place, so you definitely want to go there. But
Talk my language
you know
here.
what? I don't even think you can go wrong with food in Charleston. For me, it is literally so good. Um, I'm a big fan of architecture. And one of the great houses in
Nice.
America is Drayton Hall. It's a Palladian style plantation house, just a bit out of the city, more inland up the what's it up Route 17, I think. Beautiful. You'll have a great time. Um,
How
and
did
then
I,
go
how
to
did that from like South Carolina? You're in China. You're in Zurich. All over. How did this come about?
uh
What
wow.
and haven't you been to like a bunch of African countries too?
Yeah, so there are 54 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and I think I've been to. I think I checked. I've been to 51 or 52 of them. I meant
Oh,
to go look at it at some point. Two things. One, wanderlust. I think
yeah.
that thing of exceptional alien has driven me to try to see new lands and new places, whether it be work-wise or physically or just all kinds of things. And I mean, I've lived a lot of cities here in the United States too. So there's that. I think also I got very lucky in the beginning of my career in that I worked for a company that really believed in internal development. And so the notion that you could move from being a chemist or an engineer and someday get into marketing if you could show the right aptitude and get, of course, some additional training and development, or maybe get into IT. It was just the norm in that company. It wasn't like it was such a, I mean, it wasn't like everybody did it, but it wasn't this impenetrable barrier that stood between you and new kinds of work. And so that fortune of having that happen early in my career led me to think, okay, this is actually how the world should work. It was only later. It's kind of like when you have a sheltered childhood and you didn't realize that other people didn't have some of the things, some of the world that you had. It's like, oh, wait, you mean other companies don't work this way? It was my world and I knew it. And that was how it worked. And so I just got enormously lucky.
Well, it's also like the compounding advantage of cognitive ability. You're a super smart guy. You like combine that with like opportunity to explore the world, learn a whole different array of things. Now you can combine all those sort of insights and make yourself like so much better now too.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm also going to say something, one more thing. It's a little bit. Uh, I am surrounded by a conspiracy of love. There are people in my life who
I thought
have
that was
made.
going a totally different direction, and I was so up for it too. Like
Yeah, no, it's just a conspiracy of love. I mean, so I had these amazing aunts and uncles who would just like make sure that I got exposure to all sorts of things throughout my life. My godparents were these incredible folks who like just took care of me, helped me, enabled me. My grandparents loomed enormously large in my life. Uh, and I was very fortunate in that they lived well into my adulthood. And I even remember some of my great grandparents who lived with a set of my grandparents. So this notion that the world could be mine, I think, or that I could do great things. Um, I think I am enormously uh, benefited enormously from that, and I think that's part of the journey too.
A great way to set a kid up for success, right? Tell them that they can do anything and like show them a whole array of things from I don't know, like monster truck rallies to the opera, right?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I'll admit something hilarious to you.
You know, right?
When I was a kid, my cousins and I used to love to go to professional wrestling, and I mean, loved it. And then we go home, we try to do it, and end up hurting each other, and then it was hilarious. And we would go with one of my uncles, and of course, we all knew it wasn't real, but it was still so much fun, so much fun.
What was your move? You got like the Iron Claw or something?
Oh no, the figure four, dude. Figure
Oh
four.
yeah, oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. But I'm old, right? So like the people that I remember the most are like Mr. Wrestling number one and Mr. Wrestling number two, Ric Flair. So
Cole, give us your best Ric Flair impression.
Woo!
There you go. There you go.
I'm doing my best. That's. I was gonna. Well, I mean, did you have like a wrestler that you liked them? Like, so, like I remember Diamond Dallas Page and a diamond cutter. I thought that
oh
was
my
really cool
god.
back in the day.
Probably Mr. Wrestling number two or Thunderbolt Patterson were probably the two that I like the
Yeah.
most. Yeah, and I think it's largely has to do with in I grew up in South Carolina, but not far from Augusta, Georgia. In the Augusta, the Bell Auditorium was where wrestling was there. Um, that auditorium, those were the wrestlers we saw the most, and so you kind of that's proximity bias, right? These are the people I see. Recency bias. So these are my favorites.
When I was a kid, my father took me to the Coliseum in downtown Dallas when we saw the WWF. And like they put on their big performance, and you got these two. Of course, you watch it every week on the weekends, and like they got these two, and like they hate each other, and just clearly they hate each other. And we're in the concourse, and I could see down to the bottom level where they're all just kind of milling around. And the two enemies, they're like high fiving, like shaking hands, and they're talking it up because like they're backstage, and it like kind of like shattered my world. It's like, oh man.
Well, well, speaking of school buses earlier, I cannot tell you how many arguments and debates on the school bus there were about whether wrestling was real or not, right? Now, obviously, we all know now it wasn't real, but there was a point in time
Wait,
where
no,
people
it
didn't
was
realize.
absolutely real.
Yeah, we thought it was real. We didn't think these things were staged. Now, it seems silly in retrospect, especially since I think Vince McMahon like admitted to it in front of Congress or something at some point that it was fake. But at the time, it was like I'm sure that was earth shattering for you, Scott.
I mean, those guys really do get hurt, though. I mean, that's a lot of punishment on the body. There's been a couple documentaries. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that's a hard life. That's a hard life. Even
Yeah.
if, like, I mean, like, go figure. You can't take a flying kick to the face every night and have a good outcome, right? I don't need.
No,
I don't need an agent for that. All right.
Yeah.
no.
The thing I could never figure out is how you could hit someone with a chair and it not hurt them, right? Like because if you tried to hit somebody else with a chair, you are absolutely going to hurt them. And so there's got to be some really professional tradecraft in there to hit someone with a chair and them not be severely injured. Yeah.
Yeah, this goes to like when you're thinking about what does the on the job training look like for that activity?
Yeah, let's do some confusion matrix. I think we've run out of wrestling stuff to talk about.
Okay, yeah.
The confusion matrix. Real quick, we wanted to say thanks again to One Model, the AI and people analytics pioneer, for sponsoring the episode. And now back to the confusion matrix.
I think we can go on for hours. I don't know what you're talking about. Let's turn this into a recipe podcast.
Yeah.
Talk about a little Coco Beware, the Junkyard Dog, Hacksaw Jim Dugan.
You guys are before my time, so you guys know some of these people. I don't.
Let's do a little Recruiters Gone Wild. So this is things that people were asked during an interview that probably shouldn't have been asked, right? And if you got any complaints, send them to Cole. He was saying that he wants feedback from people that need to tell him what we're doing wrong. So everyone send your
I
email.
do not want that feedback. You can keep it to yourself.
All right. I mean, we can all play. It doesn't really matter because like these are all just kind of like I don't know, apocryphal anyway. Hey James, what would your wife or mother say is your most annoying habit? This is something that someone was asked during an interview, auspiciously.
Uh, Forgetfulness.
Oh,
I
good.
Oh yeah. It's like wait, we said forgetfulness about small things, but not ever about big things. I will remember your favorite color, your best childhood experience if we talk about it. Wait, we're going to dinner tonight at 8 o'clock with them? I
Mm.
forgot. I am total space forgetfulness about the details of the small things.
Someone just gaslighting you constantly, being like,
Mhm.
we never talked
Yeah,
about
except I'm not, because I'm not even that clever. Gaslighting requires a level of clever that I am not.
there's nothing worse than like just like standing there and like someone's like, hey, why aren't you ready? We got to go. I was like, I was about to go sit down and watch some TV, or I am
Yes,
sitting down and watching TV. WTF?
exactly.
I think mine would definitely be hard headedness and doesn't listen. Like, I think that's it for sure. What about you, Scott?
Uh, I don't remember anyone's names. It's like I'll be like I outsource my knowledge. I do this to Cole every so often too, Jane. I'd be like, hey Cole, what was that dude that we had on? Or like where was he from? And Cole would be like, the guy's from like,
And I'll
and
say, Scott, that was your best friend. How do you not know their name?
I remember liking the guy. I remember liking the guy, and that's how it essentially goes. Okay, question two: have you ever worked in a Chinese restaurant?
No, I have not.
Yeah.
I don't even know what I would do with someone, because it's awfully specific. So I'm assuming the person that they were talking to was Chinese, and therefore that's why they asked him that. Because I can't figure out why you would ask that specific a question as opposed to a restaurant.
I don't have any like background whether this was for a job at a Chinese restaurant or not, but yeah, did y'all either of you work in a restaurant?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talked about I worked at the Waffle House for a while, but I also worked at a fancy Italian place for a little while as well. James, did you ever work in the service industry?
Uh, a little bit, sort of ancillary. I worked in sort of like a bar that had like a singer. It's kind of like a lounge kind of thing. So I did that, but not really like as a server. So it was a little bit different than that. So that was fun, actually. But Waffle House, um, lately, man, you Google in Waffle House, dude. So there's like a pretty much they were getting into fights pretty much all the time,
Yeah. It's a wild place to work for sure.
Cole's
especially
about
the graveyard shift, right? You know that
Yeah.
2 a.m. at or 4 a.m. at Waffle House is an interesting place to be.
Which I did do before, and it was very weird. I'm not gonna lie, but I also was a bartender for a catering company for a while, which is also weird in a different way. But yeah, people like old rich people at weddings do weird stuff. So, I don't know.
a
Yeah,
bartender at like a catering event would be. I think that's pretty much ideal. All right, like you don't got to deal with all the bullshit that goes on in a bar, but like you
Yeah,
got your little stand. Like they have like four options. Like you get three different kinds of beer or this white wine. All right.
really. Well, Scott, have you ever been? Have you ever worked at a restaurant or anywhere like?
I never worked at a restaurant. I had friends that worked at a restaurant, and I don't know if I'd ever let my kids work at a restaurant. That's where you learn all sorts of horrible things, like the school bus for teens and adults. That's where you learn all the things you don't really need to know.
but let me just kind of tell you something funny about restaurants, just a little bit. So a
Yeah.
friend who I think I can't remember. I guess she was working at Wharton at the time. Did research on teams. And I always thought this whole job was a scam because wait till I tell you the rest of it. Okay, so she was doing this research on teams. And the thing she started looking at was what is the diversity of teams that are line cooks at high end restaurants in New York? So part of the job was to go and eat at the restaurant and go try the food. And the other part was to go start talking to chefs and managers and look at what the teams were. And she had a bunch of performance measures. And what was fascinating to me was there would be teams at some restaurants that were not just, say, a group of people from Latin America, but from the same village in Guatemala, like everybody. And they spoke the same dialect. And it was just fascinating to understand that those teams and how well they could work. And she did this work, but I swear it was all just a scam for her to be able to go and eat at luxury restaurants. And I'm hoping that someday someday my life will get me to something like that.
This is a basic network analytic finding that like if you want to like suss out and like improve things and like avoid disaster, you want like very diverse teams. Like it's like because like we're gonna like trip and fall because we didn't see this coming. But like once you have that honed down and you want to be very performative, you want a very homogenous team. They've all worked
Hmm.
together before. They all kind of they get it. They know how to like communicate very effectively, if very efficiently, and they can perform very very well at very high levels in that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We need to get the elaborate job analysis ploy to either work at luxury hotels or ski slopes in the wintertime or something like that, Scott. That should be our next plan.
I love that idea so much. You have some physics background, James? Is that what you said earlier?
More chemistry, chemical engineering.
Okay, well, there's chemicals and there's some engineering here. We'll make this the last one. Why are manhole covers round? Someone asked this in an interview. Why are manhole covers round?
That's
No,
actually a good question.
is a good question. Like, what was it that would have made them round as opposed to square? Uh,
I
Probably
don't know.
because it wouldn't you wouldn't have edges or corners that would be hard to place. Just by having it be round, you could put it
Yeah.
down, and then it wouldn't have to worry about like getting it as precisely oriented to put it back in place. Is my only guess as to why it would be round.
I mean, it's kind of like, why do some countries drive on the left side of the road and others drive on the right hand side of the road? It very well could have been a square. It's just the first person who decided to make a manhole cover, made it a circle and then it just stuck, probably.
It could be part of like the manufacturing process. Like it's just easier to make a round object than a square for some reason.
Would
It
it
could be
be?
because it could be because pipes are round. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's actually probably the right answer.
Here,
Pipes are round.
I'll have a bonus one for you. Wait, someone was asked this: Is Die Hard a Christmas movie? Hot takes. Go.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a Christmas party there,
Yep.
right?
It happens around Christmas. It's a
Yeah.
Christmas movie.
I, I don't even like the movie Die Hard. Like that's the
What?
thing. Yeah,
What?
sorry, not a fan. Like it just wasn't. It's not my style.
Okay.
Anyway, well,
Man,
you want to do some nerdery now? The nerdery.
yeah, I feel really let down by that.
I what?
Yeah, Cole. I'm not sure you should admit that. I'm not sure you should admit that in public. I mean, even though you just told like thousands of people, I don't know that that was a good thing.
Well, as a consequence, maybe I should feel lonely from not liking Die Hard. Perhaps we should talk about loneliness.
You want to do this loneliness? So all the lonely people, the continuing lament about the loss of community. I've been wanting to read this for quite a while, and I just kind of threw it in Cold's face. Like, yeah, let's talk about it. It's as a forcing function to read it, and I kind of have like mixed feelings about it. But this article explores the recurring notion that communities are deteriorating, and that this belief is repeated over and over. They go through the article. They talk about people talk about the deterioration of culture from like the 1700s all the way to essentially current. So it's you kind of see these sort of things when it's like, oh, the youth of today are not like they used to be, kind of like the same sort of thing. But the others essentially take a positive spin on communication technologies transform us into more pervasive networks, emphasizing that the structure evolves, it's not essentially lost. And they point to two big things. So we got networked individualism, which is we all have access to the internet or cell phones and this sort of stuff that allows us to get in contact with other folks, and relational persistence. So it used to be when your neighbor in South Carolina were to move away, well, fuck off and never see you again. Now you got their email address, you got their phone number that doesn't change, and you got like say their Instagram handle that you can contact them again. They do say that while traditional communities were tightly knit and supportive, they were also reinforced rigid hierarchies and restricted freedoms, while modern communities are characterized by less dense in diverse networks facilitated by technologies. So that's a lot to take in, but essentially technologies are changing the way we interact and we form communities rather than just destroying them.
When I saw this, I immediately thought, and I read this a while ago, There's a book called Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam.
2000, yeah.
Yeah, and given that's, I mean, that's 24 years ago now, and I'm sure the technology trends have just accelerated this even more. But he shows, I mean, he bludgeons you, as Ron Hetrick would say, with data to show how people really are more lonely and communities are less intact than they used to be. And I can't see any reason why those trends would have decreased over time. So I mean, I think I see a lot of articles about like there's a loneliness epidemic out there. So this is a real thing, and it's not just, you know, the times they're always the same where, you know, 300 years ago they said, ah, well, kids these days they're the worst. And it's like, well, I think it's even adults are feeling the loneliness epidemic, not just children, and it's because we all need to join our local bowling league. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, James?
You know, I guess at the same time, I think we do find that there is I think in the traditional sense, it's right that the community that we're physically in is hard, but the communities of mindset, of attitude, of sexual orientation, of uh, geekdom, you know, I mean, we're a community right here and we're nowhere near each other physically. And that community is pretty important to me and pretty rich, but it's not the people who are going to be the folks who I'm going to see outside. I think the challenge is how to make that thing still be real and work, and at the same time not have it, because you haven't interacted with those humans that are on the street as much. When you do have that opportunity, it's not one of aggression, disinterest, or just malevolence in some cases too. So I think there's a little bit of that. So yeah.
Well, speaking of the community and the people analytics being a community unto itself, even when we live in different places, and I don't even know if you remember this, James, but that's actually how I met you in the first place. Is Desalina up in Chicago created the first people analytics meetup group, and I was there kind of helping her organize it at the time when I lived in Chicago, and we were doing some kind of like group discussion or something, and there was this guy in the back, and he just started throwing, you know, like hot takes and but really like intelligent stuff. And I was like, who is this guy? And I come to find out that was you, and you were leading people analytics at Boeing at the time. And I was like, this guy's brilliant. I want to get to know him. And so I've had you in the back of my mind for years just because of that experience in the people analytics community itself.
Well, thank you. I think that was more generous than I deserve. But I remember that event. It was at SCE, and who are an
Hmm.
equipment manufacturer. And I remember and I remember getting there and thinking, wow, this is a lot of security. It,
Yeah.
I worked in the nuclear industry at one point when I was in high school. Actually, worked in a place where we made weapons grade plutonium and tritium. So, like, you know, in that "what's your first job" kind of game,
Yeah.
I can throw that one out. But it's interesting. That building had a lot of security around it. I was thinking, wow, this is a lot. And then I remember coming in and just saying, you know, it was kind of like revelations of surprise, because there was that. And then there was like, wow, this is a wonderful community. I'm loving it, being a part of it. There were so many brilliant people in the room. There was such good stuff that was happening. Um, I miss Chicago. I'll be honest. I miss it for a variety of reasons, and one of the things I miss is just that strength of the people analytics folks who were there.
Yeah, for sure.
I wonder if like, this would have resonated with Cole so much had it been like totally online. Like the fact that y'all got to meet in person. Back to the article, uh,
Yeah.
had like a big influence on Cole there.
It would not have. I mean, I'll tell you that because
Yeah.
I remember during COVID, I personally set up multiple online meetups, and I'll tell you this, like I really appreciate it. So we did one with Keith McNulty, and he did a big demo, and Keith is just fantastic. And then we did another one with Amit Mohindra, who's also fantastic. And he covered some of the research he did on people analytics leaders. But other than them and their presentations, I don't think I made any genuine connections with people in those events. And so it makes a big difference for sure.
Absolutely.
We got like so many options too. Like you think about like say Tinder, it disproportionately affects women in a negative way. That too many options, right? You can reach too many communities where we really evolved on, the Saharan, sub-Saharan Africa to in small communities that traded when needed, right? So we are predestined to actually have small community structures that connect to other groups, but technology really throws a wrench in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
What is the friend limit? I think I read it somewhere, but I don't remember it. It
It used
says,
to be 110, Dunbar's number.
Yeah.
okay.
But I mean, those are like strong ties. People you can actually remember their names, unlike me, or remember like their birthdays and this sort of stuff. But clearly, like we all know 1,000 people, perhaps
Yeah.
more. Like, oh yeah, I met them. I met Keith McNulty. I met
Yeah, but
James.
we all have LinkedIn networks that are like what, 10,000 folks. So I mean, that's one of the weird things about the
LinkedIn is like, oh, you friended me. Well, I guess I'll never see your ass ever again. Thanks for playing.
Yeah, it is. I think it's like as your number of connections increase, the value to you decreases or
Yes,
something like that. I don't know.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, do you guys want to talk about? Well, I'll give you the choice, Scott. Do you want to go with how to create LLMs or the impact that LLMs are going to have on different industries?
How we do the creation and then the impact later? Does that make sense? I think.
Yeah, I think that makes logical sense.
So this is this is for my own edification. This is kind of a just a learning moment. Uh, I imagine a lot of people already know this sort of stuff about how LLMs and how they differ from, let's say, RAG models and fine tuning models. But here we go. So you got two large types. You got foundation models, which are built on a lot of data, and the purpose is to go wide and not deep. And they perform a variety of functions, such as general tasks, general text tasks, visual comparisons, and this sort of stuff. They can be considered a superset of LLMs. LLMs, large language models, are once again a subset of foundational models, and they're based solely on text data, so they can be applied to text and text-like sort of things. Text-like things being, coding. Uh, During the training process, the models are constantly adjusting their parameters based on how close the actual input matches the predicted output. So when people talk about LLMs, all they're doing is predicting the next word in the sequence. That's what they're talking about. That's exactly what they're talking about. So how do you make them useful? James, you alluded to this earlier. You're going to have all these different sort of agents, and they're all going to have to talk to each other because they're trained in different ways. One, you got fine tuning. So large language models can be trained on specific subsets or corpuses of data to make them experts on certain tasks. So you could be like, we're going to feed them a bunch of culture information. We're going to feed them a bunch of legal information and make them like legal experts. And this is much less computer intensive than the overall training of the LLM. Then you got the RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, that describes a system that adds extra data in addition to what the user provided, so that the LLM can query that information and use that extra information. So we had Hutch on, who talked about adding metadata to actual HR systems to help the LLMs actually perform. So that's it in a nutshell. You got foundational models, large language models, and you can actually fine tune them or use this RAG approach to make them useful.
When I love the little visualization that I've got popped up on the screen here, where it shows that the LLMs are really the go between the foundation models. That's where the fine tuning, that's where the RAG happens, and then the local LLMs that can be chained all the way down to a specific set of knowledge. And so I think this is where that split between those two, and I may be misinterpreting this, but the split between those two, I think, is where the power of some of the different AI agents can come in. So you can have an agent that's trained to do one thing, an agent that's trained to do another, via those local LLMs, and then just putting them into practice and even getting the collaboration that we talked about with Richard Rosenau a few weeks ago of those agents, that maybe you could create a whole people analytics function or a whole translation function. And I think this is just fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. It, Scott, you mentioned something when you say, all probability, it reminds me of a really important moment in this space. And I'm going to go back to something I don't want to talk about necessarily some aspect of it, which is the sort of like the policy part. But there was a moment when there were two researchers who came out with a paper called On Stochastic Parrots, basically talking about these large language models as being this probabilistic set of what is the next word. And they talked about the dangers of these things. And they said a few things about them. And it was Timnit Gebru and Emily Bender. Timnit at the time was at Google. Emily Bender is still at the University of Washington. And they said a few things about them that were important that we're seeing. Number one, they're enormously expensive. The carbon footprint on these things, the amount of energy, technology, energy, compute that it takes to do it, huge. And huge in the sense that it's you see it manifested in these things are expensive, right? I mean, like you want to sign up for one, it's $20 a month or $30 a month. So a pretty pricey thing. Next thing they talked about was, low explainability. It's not like you can look at the thing and figure out and do it, And as people analytics professionals, one of the things we struggle with all the time is explainability of our models. And so you've got this thing that's doing something, and how are you ever going to know that it's right? They're low reproducibility because inherently they're stochastic, right? So they're trying to predict, but they're not going to write or generate the same thing over and over again, albeit RAGs do solve some of that problem of no hallucination and some other things. Let's see, I'll send you guys a paper that kind of summarizes like how they were right. There's something in the MIT Technology Review from a few years ago that kind of talked about it. But those are some of the big things I think that are pretty important about them. And these models are incredible. They're going to do some interesting things, but I think, and the other one is just the fact that they can allow you to create things that look real but are not real. And I think we're already starting to feel that with the deep fakes that we see, where it looks like there's a phone call from your CEO that's saying they need a piece of data from you as a people analytics leader because they need to have the salary of these following people, but it's really not. It's really some other person who's asked for that information.
A new phishing sort of scam.
But to the next level of it sounds like that human, or they make a video and it looks like that person.
Yep. Well, and I even made this LinkedIn post about this that's a little bit more banal, but I just tried to upload my photo and I just wanted AI to touch it up a little bit. Right. Mm-hmm. And because of GPT or the ChatGPT 4.0, it's fine tuning limitations. It just wouldn't do it. And so it kept making me this extremely like Ryan Reynolds, attractive looking guy with a beard. And I'm like, this isn't right. So I'm like, keep telling the models, like, make me less attractive, because this is not realistic looking. And it was embarrassing. And I posted it on LinkedIn. It just blew up because there are limitations to these models. And I think they're trying to get around them by like saying like, hey, you can't take somebody's image and likeness and make it your own. But again, there's hacks of getting around that and everything.
Wait, so are you saying that there's like a shirtless Fabio style Cole image out there?
There is. I didn't post that one, but no, seriously, I was going through this chain and it kept giving me like new iterations of what I was looking for. I probably tried conservatively 50 times to get it to work properly. And it just like some of the versions really were like Cole's like a merman, like with the shirt off. I was like, this is not what I'm looking to do.
You have to send that. You have to send that to us. I'm sorry.
Pull it up.
That's not for the light of day. We're not looking at that.
I do want to, like, James, you did hit on something about the explainability of the models, and this has been a common thing from logistic regression models, which are fairly explainable, all the way to neural networks and et cetera, more advanced modeling. I think that this is something that I don't see people talk about a lot. Like, well, we're just going to throw all this like qualitative data into it, and it's going to spit out some information, and we're going to be like super curious of what it says. And people, I think the technology is so cool, and it's so kind of not foreign, but it is so cool that a lot of people like just forego like, yeah, we can't really explain it. We're not going to worry about that. I don't really hear a lot of people talking about that, and it's really
Mhm.
really worrisome because you don't know what sort of information that LLM was built off of, and it's just going to try and once again, if you have to understand the background of how it's producing the output, it's just trying to predict what it already knows from its foundational base. So like the actual explainability is a critical thing, but once again, I think that people just kind of just are currently just kind of sidestepping it as an
Yeah,
issue.
they're like,
But
does it sound good? Does it sound right? Well, if
I
it
mean,
sounds right,
yeah,
it's
it
probably
sounds
right.
truthiness, you know?
yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
and it sounds so human.
Yeah,
It fools you into sounding right because when on its face, unless you're an expert and it's doing something that, or you're doing it's doing something that's so overtly wrong that even expertise is not required.
yeah.
If it just looks like, okay, well, it must be right. It came out, and I think it's not also not helped by the fact that so many vendors talk about it as if it's the bit end all and be all, because they've spent so much money to build this thing that they got to get out here and hustle this product and peddle it to people for use cases that it shouldn't be used for, uh, because you spent so much money to build it. So that's the other problem. It's almost like it's its own technology arms race is happening again.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, and that's what we've said a bunch of times on here is like, just the thing we needed, another chat bot, right? It's like, no, if once you can get it to start fixing real business problems that have a real ROI, that's when it's really going to take off. But for now, we're going to be in the, what is it called? The trough of disillusionment here pretty soon. And
Yeah.
then it's going to get to, going up the slope of enlightenment.
We're in a really weird time too, like just because like the fine tuning. Like you can make certain agents masters or experts in certain domains, but we're not to the point yet where like they all kind of trade off together, right? Or it becomes like a seamless experiment or experience for the individual, right? Like you still have to go to like this website to do this and that website to do that. And
Mhm.
it's already been alluded to that somehow this needs to be integrated seamlessly.
With that in mind, I'm going to pull up some research that's done by the Burning Glass Institute. And so I believe they're a nonprofit. So I don't think they have an axe to grind here at all. But what they did is they created a ranking system. I believe these are all just publicly traded companies of a company's generative AI exposure ranking. So the higher you're ranked, the more exposed you are to potentially being disrupted
Mm,
by
mm,
generative AI. And they have a color scheme here, and you can see all of the top ranked companies come from the finance and insurance industry in orange. So you've got companies like Edward Jones, New York Life, Equitable, Northern Trust, Northwestern Mutual. And then if you skip all the way down to the other end of the least impacted, it's a lot of what we've talked about here on before is like companies that are more like analog or they're in the real world. So you've got things like airlines. You're not going to be able to transport person from point A to point B with AI just yet. So you still need an airplane to do it. You've got things like restaurants. You've got Chipotle and Darden. You've got things like pharmacies, so like Rite Aid, Bed Bath and Body Works. All right, I always get those confused. It's Bed Bath and Beyond and Bath and Body Works. Sorry. Um, and then a few others. You got like grocery stores, you've got gas stations, but it's pretty interesting to see,
yeah.
what industries are, and you could actually say, some of the most lucrative ones on here, again, finance and insurance, those have been some of the most lucrative industries in our country. These are some of that are most likely to be disrupted. So how did you guys react to this?
It kind of makes sense, right? I worked at Allstate for a while, as did Scott. And when I think about the nature of that company as a company that does underwriting and has a huge community of folks to do that, you've got to do claims, and a lot of that is like vision processing and stuff like that. So that's another big swath. And then you've got a huge IT organization that's really putting all that stuff together. And the same thing is true of banks. I mean, banks are really IT companies that work in finance. They're huge technology organizations that happen to apply that technology to financial services, which is why when people say fintech, I'm like, they're all fintech. They're not. They all have It's just whether you had a legacy and historical brick and mortar financial services, or whether you were only come up in the digital age, as to whether there's a bit of a difference. So it kind of makes sense as to those things that are going to be there. I think the biggest thing for me is, how much of it is that the work that people do is going to be transformed or changed versus their jobs getting obviated. All we hear about, or not all, but so much of what we hear about is, oh, these jobs are all going away. Again, is that hype cycle? I'm not sure that's really going to happen. I look at how many technologies we've had over the years that have come in. You see the internet come online, you see other technologies come. And what they've done is they've transformed work. And yes, there have been some jobs that have gone away. But so much of it has been about what jobs are different and how are they different and how are we getting people ready for it and ready for the new things that they'll have to do or can do now that those technologies are in place, and maybe it's getting rid of a few tasks that they used to do differently.
I like the positive outlook, James. I know you got a hard stop here, but it's so good to meet you. I look forward to our robot overlords,
Yes.
etc. And the alien, the exceptional alien moniker is just absolute gold. It's nice to meet you,
Yeah,
James.
you've definitely been an exceptional alien ever since we met at that meetup back in the 2010s. So James, you're fantastic. I've been looking forward to having you on here for a while, but wanted to give you the final word.
Well, just, hey guys, this opportunity was, number one, extremely fun, but keep it up. The podcast is great. I love it. I look forward to it. I'm like, okay, when's the next one? And then there are folks where I want to go back and watch it again. I'm even going to encourage you to think about something. My last bit.
Okay.
Think about how you might put a virtual agent over the podcast so that people can search for all the gold that's been here. I mean, like, how many times are people actually going to get the opportunity to have an in-depth conversation amongst three analytics geeks about wrestling? That's just absolute gold. They need to be able to find it, along with other things that we talk about that are a little bit more germane to our work. So think about whether you want to put a virtual agent on top of your podcast history, and I think it'll be some great stuff for people.
Yeah. No, I know Josh Bergson has done that with his, and so is the HR Leaders podcast. That's definitely something we could pursue if we were actually legitimate. But no, James, you're fantastic, and we got to wrap this thing up for you to get off here. So you've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Colin Scott, and today's guest, James Gallman. Thanks so much for joining us, James.
Thank you, guys.
Directionally Correct is dedicated to you, our listeners, to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. By supporting this podcast, you are helping us continue to provide valuable insights and knowledge to our listeners. Please consider becoming a patron of the podcast. You can find the link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for your support.